Sound check, one, two, three.
You're audible.
Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Good morning, Zote. Tebogo. How many
Good
members?
morning, sir. We have 8 members on the platform. We do have a quorum, the meeting.
Okay.
Or now, 9.
Oh, no, thanks. Let's start. Good morning, honorable members. of the Standing Committee Finance, you are all welcome. And let me welcome all the people who are in attendance of this meeting. Our secretariat, research, content, and everybody who's in the support team, the communication team of Parliament, legal and all other divisions, and welcome the stakeholders who are in attendance, including the media. Everybody is welcome. Let me officially open the meeting, and then we move to roll call and apologies, if ever there are apologies. Tebuko, do we have apologies?
We don't have any, sir.
Okay, no apologies. The purpose of today's meeting is a public hearing on the responsible spending bill initiated by Dr. George. It's a private member's bill. Like any other bill, we are going to treat this bill in the same process like we treat bills from the minister, deputy minister, and from the committee. So today is the public hearing. We only have one stakeholder that is in attendance. According to the records that I have, Tebuko, you can confirm. For now, I see COSATU who will be making the submission. The other stakeholders who will be submitting orally.
No, it's only COSATU, sir. No other stakeholders express their interest to present.
Okay, hopefully we'll get written submissions from other stakeholders. Okay, let's proceed to item 3. Presentation by COSATU. Comrade Matthew, are you there?
Morning, Honorable Chair, members. We're here. Morning.
Okay, allocate. Is it 20 minutes? 10 past up to half past. Yeah. You have got 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, over to you, Comrade Matthew. You have got 20 minutes.
No, thanks, Morning Chair. I'm sure we will take less than that. We know members, are under time pressures as Parliament is doing quite a bit of work concluding issues. No, Chair, thanks also just to the committee for giving space to COSATU just to share our views on this bill. We feel a little bit sheepish that we might be abusing the human rights of members by only COSATU coming to make its input, but I think we do respect the role of all members of Parliament to play across political party spectrum, and we think we need to engage on the bills they draft seriously. We have supported a few private members' bills over the years, even those drafted by opposition members, like the PIC Amendment Act, which was drafted by the DA originally. The ACDP and the UDM and COPE have also drafted progressive law. So yes, we support the ANC, but we recognize each member has got an elected responsibility we want to assist and engage. Chair, on this bill drafted by Honorable Dr. George, in essence, we reject it as COSATU. We do support the objective of tackling the national debt, and we think that's correct. But we think the proposals in the bill, which we view in essence as dumping the bill for state capture or for stagnant economic growth, etc., mismanagement, on nurses and teachers and police officers. And we think that really is, one, is unacceptable. Two, we think is actually going to collapse public services. We do need a debate on public debt. What is the level? What items in the state could be cut or reduced or shifted, etc.? What shouldn't be cut? We also need to have a debate about tackling the real causes of the fiscal crisis. For example, the issues of corruption, of wasteful expenditure, the challenges facing SOEs and tax evasion and slow economic growth rates. But we shouldn't take a shortcut route to resolving our issues because it's not going to assist. We think, Chair, the way the bill has been drafted, even if it's without intention, but in essence, it has been drafted in a way which is, we think, unconstitutional and undermines workers' rights. So the Constitution guarantees workers the rights to collective bargaining. But what, in essence, the bill will do is to simply collapse collective bargaining at the PSABC and simply make it a determination of members of parliament through a law. So in other words, there will be no need for collective bargaining because members of parliament can just simply draft a law and determine the increase for workers. So we think that really will have a negative impact upon workers' rights, and hence we would call upon Parliament not to support this bill. On the issue of the national debt, Chair, we agree with Honourable Dr. George, and I think all members of Parliament across party line. We should be concerned by the rapid rise in our national debt levels from about 23% a decade ago to about 70% roughly now. And I think the main thing is the growth in the debt levels. And this is something that should concern everybody, including ourselves as workers. We do fear that if we don't get the debt under control in the next couple of years, we will be in risk of entering a debt trap. And that will have devastating consequences. We can't afford to go to the IMF for bailout because we'll sacrifice our national sovereignty. And many of our progressive gains we've achieved as a country since 1994 through government will be at a serious risk, from the social security net to the investments in working class communities, the SOEs, etc. Because the IMF would impose such devastating conditions, it would not only mean that workers would take salary cuts and be retrenched in the public sector, but our social wage would be rolled back. And we've seen that in many other countries, for example, in Greece and Ireland and so forth. So, Chair, we're keen to manage the debt, but we think, Chair, we should do it in a strategic and a scientific way, but simply cutting expenditure won't resolve the issue. In fact, it might even choke the economy when it actually needs to be supported to recover from a recession. So our proposal, Chair, is let's have a sober debate on the appropriate debt levels and where we can and can't cut. But let's really avoid populist election, theatrics, which might entertain the wealthy CEOs in Sandton, etc., but will really come at the expense of nurses and cleaners who barely earn enough to survive. And again, Chair, I think, as you said, we think the bill is drafted in a fundamentally flawed way. It imposes conditions on the employment of public servants. It undermines collective bargaining. The PSABC is a creature of statute, where conditions of employment are negotiated upon by law. And equally, the NEDLAC Act passed by Parliament requires all bills affecting labour market issues to be tabled for engagement, and neither of this has happened. So that's one issue. And of course, again, as we said, it's going to collapse collective bargaining. We think that'll be a recipe for labour market strife, which will not benefit anyone, not the state, not society, not workers. So I propose, Chair, that any such bills, let them be engaged at the relevant forums first, which is normally the practice, that they go to the PSABC, they go to NEDLAC, etc. An interesting note, Chair, is that the DA is concerned about the public service wage bill. But when the Companies Amendment Bill, which is currently before Parliament, which says the private sector, listed companies, SOEs, need to disclose the wage gap between the top earners, the CEOs, and the bottom earners, the cleaners and the security guards, the DA has opposed and voted against that bill. So it's interesting that they want to oppose it for the public sector, but the private sector should be given carte blanche. Yet it is workers' pension funds which fund companies in the private sector, especially listed ones. Chair, in terms of the actual content of the bill and our premise for opposing it, beside the procedural issues. So it contains really three elements. One is that if public debt is less than 55% of the GDP, any increase in the public service wage bill should be linked to the previous year's growth. Whether the economy grew or didn't grow, then there'll be no increase in expenditure. If the public debt is between 55 and 60% of the GDP, then the public service wage bill should be frozen. And if the public debt, like it is currently in South Africa, is above 60%, or about 70% roughly, then the compensation of the wage bill should be cut by 5% each year. So in essence, in simple terms, irrespective of the three scenarios, under the DA's proposals, public service salaries will be cut for the foreseeable future, even beyond the 4 years they're proposing in the bill. GDP growth averages about 1%, 1.5%, yet CPI is normally around 4.5%. So under the best case scenario, in 2024, workers actually would have received a 4.8% cut in real terms, if you take into account inflation and slow GDP growth rate. If we had a 55 to 60% scenario, that in real terms, public servants would have received a 5.5% cut in salaries, or they would have been retrenched. And as of the case right now with our debt over 60% of GDP, which Treasury, I think, predicts it'll be up until 2030, then public servants, after you take into account a 5% cut of the bill necessitates, we take into account inflation of about 5.5%, 5.1%. In essence, public servants would have received this year a 10.5% cut in real terms, and going forward, they'll be getting a cut of about 10% every year. So, Chair, for us, all we can interpret out of this bill is that the DA hates public servants. We think this bill is beyond redemption. It just can't be fixed. Chair, the DA says in the bill, the bill says that, apologies, this wouldn't apply to public servants covered by occupational specific dispensations. Yet Treasury has been pushing to move away from that. The OSDs are actually falling apart on the seams. And the DA, from my understanding, has actually supported Treasury doing away with the OSDs. So we're not sure what exactly is the exclusion. But also, Chair, even beyond that, even if the OSDs were there and it's fine, why would we say that correctional service officers deserve an increase, but cleaners and drivers and security guards don't deserve an increase? They're not all affected by inflation. They're not all in the same economy, funded by the same budget. Ironically, Chair, there's no reference to public representatives. Yet again, the salaries come from the same fiscus. And I think, Chair, there's no recognition the fiscal crisis is caused by the weak economy, corruption, wasteful expenditure, bailouts. It's not caused by a declining wage bill. Chair, we're also concerned that what are the unintended consequences if you continue to squeeze public servants who actually have been receiving below inflation increases for a few years now? One is that you plunge them deeper into debt, you collapse morale and productivity. And also, Chair, as we can see, increasingly you have a brain drain of skilled public servants from the state going to the private sector, going to overseas, especially with regards to medical personnel, to teachers, to police officers, and so forth. Chair, with the 55% and over 55% parameters of the bill, we think in essence public servants could forget about an increase for a decade, even if debt was to fall. They'll be lucky to get CPI under the best case scenarios, but they'll never get a CPI increase. So, Chair, this really is a bill which is going to hurt working class communities the hardest. Working class communities also hit hardest by inflation because inflation tends to be at a much higher rate for poor households. When you look at electricity or transport or food, they tend to be much more significantly above the CPI rate. And we'd hope that the DA, which does get votes in the working class communities of the Cape Flats, would understand that issue. Chair, if you look at the wage bill, and that seems to be the essence of the objective of the bill, it's not the cause of the fiscal crisis or the debt. But yet the focus of the bill implies it is. If we look at the Treasury budgets for the last 16 years, the wage bill has been stable since 2008 at 35% of the budget. In fact, in the most recent budget, it actually decreased to 31.7% of the budget. So there's no out of control wage bill in that regard. We've seen the headcount increase in 2008 when the state decided to, correctly so, to employ additional skilled public servants like teachers or nurses, doctors, etc. But if we take a step back and compare ourselves to 1994, when we had 34 million South Africans, 1 million public servants, today public servants have only increased by about 20%, yet the population of the country has nearly doubled by 100%. So we're having a real decline that we're seeing on average each year. We've seen it in the police service, for example, and the hospitals and teachers and so forth. And that's really having a huge impact upon the ability of the state to provide quality public services, especially to working class communities, to rural areas, etc. If we take the philosophical argument that often the DA members of the media raise and say, well, the public service wage bill is bloated compared to the private sector, it's a false comparison. The private sector employs farm workers, domestic workers, mine workers, taxi drivers, cashiers. The state doesn't employ those categories. Public service employs doctors, nurses, teachers, police officers, correctional services, defense force personnel. And again, you will not always find those types of workers in the private sector. We'd rather say, let's compare the salaries of doctors or teachers in the public sector versus the private sector, because then you have a more scientific comparison. But then you will find that, in fact, the private sector pays more for those skilled categories, and hence the brain drain. Chair, there's no mention in the bill about reducing the exorbitant packages paid to politicians or paid to senior management in the public service, the SOEs, public sector, etc. The wage gap in the public sector is about 13-1, which is far better than the private sector, which is 33-1. And again, while we raised the point about the companies management bills, that you have the CEOs in the private sector, the banks, the retail sector, etc., earning more in a single day than a worker would be lucky to earn in a year. And of course, also, Chair, the bill also ignores the fact that workers support on average about 7 relatives in an economy with about a 41% unemployment rate. So yes, one can pick on public servants, but there's a societal responsibility they fulfill as well. And I think, Chair, in essence, getting towards the end, we do fear that if this bill was passed, it would spark a brain drain. It would really put public servants in serious trouble, and they're already heavily indebted. Our proposal, Chair, is let's have the debate on the wage gap in the public and the private sector. Let's have legislation to reduce the wage gap. Let's look at reducing what we pay people on top, especially management in the SOEs. Let's have a single collective bargaining process for the entire state. And I think Treasury is keen on that nowadays because that can help save some money for the state and have greater stability and greater certainty for the budget. But let's deal with the real cause of the fiscal crisis, which is around the issues of corruption, of wasteful expenditure, the issue of tax evasion, of mismanaged SOE needing bailouts, and of course, the economy struggling to grow. If you want to reduce the fiscal pressures, reduce the debt, that's ultimately what we have to do. And there are tools we can use, from the Auditing Amendment Act to deal with corruption, and putting in place a single public procurement system for the state. Let's banning persons, politicians from doing business in the state, etc. But let's most critically resource the commercial crimes courts to deal with corruption, etc. And of course, we need to have plans to turn our SOEs around, including putting in place competent management, giving support to SARS to deal with tax evasion, growing the economy, etc. So, Chair, in conclusion, apologies for taking members' time as of the only presenters. We think that in essence, this bill, it literally just simply seeks to dump the bill for state capture, mismanagement, slow economic growth rate upon teachers and nurses and cleaners. It doesn't add value in terms of what needs to be done to fix the state or grow the economy. It doesn't even add value about what is the appropriate level of debt or what is the best route to manage its growth and to reduce it ultimately. We do fear it undermines the Constitution and the labor laws that enshrine the right to collective bargaining. And we would hope to see, Chair, in Mitchell's Plain and Goodwood, that the idea would go to working class voters and say, this is the manifesto, that they want to cut the salaries of workers. And lastly, Chair, we'd want to call upon Parliament to simply reject the bill. So thanks very much, Chair, and hope we did not go off too much on a tangent. Thanks very much, Chair and members.
Thanks, Comrade Matthew. You still had 10 minutes of the allocated time. Thanks very much. Let's proceed to the next item. Interaction by committee members. Members, there you are. Do you want to ask clarity, seeking questions, and or make inputs or comments? Let's start with Honorable Manyi, Honorable Skosane, Honorable Sarupen. Honorable Manyi, over to you.
Yeah. Good morning, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the great presentation. On a light note, I think this presentation, I don't know whether because Comrade Matthew today has got a red top on, so indeed it was an inspiring submission. Yeah. No, I must say, Chairperson, I think from where I sit, it was a very refreshing presentation coming from COSATU, refreshing in the sense that it was a properly worker-focused submission where the interests of the workers, more than anything else, have been on the fore. And I think the analysis that COSATU has gone into is quite deep analysis. They've looked at their numbers, they've made a very compelling case to say this thing should not see the light of day. And I think from where we sit, as the EFF, we were fully supportive of that position. It's been our position already, by the way, that we've already stated our position that indeed this is just shifting chairs in the Titanic What the country requires now is how to grow the economy. What the DA is presenting on the table is a simple thing that says, instead of growing the cake, just don't eat breakfast, maybe skip lunch, and maybe just have dinner only to save the food and whatever. This is basically what they're saying. What the country needs is all kinds of strategies to grow the economy and all of that. So I don't want to repeat what we said last time, because today there is a submission by stakeholders, and I think what stakeholders are saying today, COSATU in particular, I think the backing up what we said on our part as well, to say, no, the DA must go to plan B. This plan A is really not going to fly. Chairperson, let me not waste time. Thank you for the submission, COSATU. And once again, well done. And I would really appeal to COSATU to really do this kind of a presentation, or rather this probe for all bills, not just private members' bills. Because the impression I get is that when it's executive-sponsored bills, I think there's less rigor, maybe because it's alliance partners. But I would really appeal to COSATU to take this kind of a stance to look after the interests of the workers. And today, I think you've outdone yourselves. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Manyu. Honorable Kosana, yes. Over to you. Inhlonishwa.
Ngiyathokoza Sihlalo. Ngilotshisa kamalunga alihloniphekileko, the parliamentary support team, COSATU, and other stakeholders present. Yeah, no, Chair, we welcome a comprehensive presentation that has been made by COSATU on this responsible spending bill that was tabled by Honorable Dr. George. I think they've raised a number of important things. And one of the important things, I think, is the acknowledgement on their part that we've got a fiscal crisis as a country, and we need solutions to deal with that kind of a crisis, high debt to GDP ratio, which end up necessitating cuts in our budget allocations to different programs and different budget votes. I think the main point that they are making is that as much as we have that particular crisis and we've got to find solutions to deal with it, but we shouldn't perhaps come up with solutions that become a burden only to public servants or to the working class and the poor. We've got to find solutions that are not going to be a burden only to the public servants, because it makes us, according to them, look as if we are saying, out of all these crises that we have, we expect the public servants to carry this burden. I think that is a very important point that I think as the committee and as Parliament, we need to look at. Well, just one question on the issue of NETLEC Act. I think they've made reference to NETLEC Act, that NETLEC Act requires all bills affecting labor market to be tabled at NETLEC for engagement. So I want to find out at what stage is that supposed to happen? Because here this is a public, it's a private member's bill, which has been tabled by Honorable Dr. George. So at what stage was that supposed to happen? Was Dr. George supposed to do so before bringing this bill to Parliament? Or as a committee, before we call for public participation, we're supposed to engage NETLEC, or we're supposed to do that after public participation? Just want to find out at what stage are we supposed to do that? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Charlie. Honorable Sarpen.
Thank you very much, Chair. My apologies for the video. I'm in a load shedding block at the moment, so my signal is not 100%. Chairperson, let me start by firstly indicating that while we receive the presentation and note its contents, I think the use of excessive hyperbolic language is not very useful, and I don't understand why there's such a hysterical reaction, particularly the use of hyperbolic language. Fiscal rules are not uncommon. Most countries in the world have a fiscal rule, and COSATU didn't touch at all on the fiscal rule. They honed in only in two clauses in the bill, Clause 2B, subsection 3, Clause 2C, subsection 3, and didn't propose an amendment or a change. They could have simply come here and said, make it only for salary earners over a certain threshold, and then it would resolve their concerns around the cleaners and working class, and it would have affected middle and upper income earners in the States only. It's a very minor technical adjustment that they could have made to address their concerns. And so we got this massive hyperbolical presentation. Now, Namibia, Botswana, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, Gabon, Cameroon, all have fiscal rules. They all have legislation like this, every single one of them. Do you know which countries don't have fiscal rules? Zimbabwe, Venezuela, DRC, Myanmar, and Afghanistan. I'd argue that the country more on the side of workers have fiscal rules, and countries like Zimbabwe and Venezuela, where people are starving, have no fiscal rules and are definitely not on the side of workers. So we must be very careful about doing proper analysis, and I don't think we got a proper analysis today. So what I want to understand from COSATU is why did it not delve into looking at the problems this bill is actually trying to solve? How does the state maintain debt stability? And there are lots of other measures in there, not just the public wage bill and other clauses in the bill to do that. Why and how do we restore credibility and trust in public finances? Last year and this year, both ratings agencies, analysis, and institutions have all said that they're not convinced on the credibility of the proposals made by National Treasury. This is where fiscal anchors and fiscal rules become very, very important. There was no discussion at all about then how do we resolve various problems such as the fact that when states do not maintain excessive government deficits for a long period of time, that economic growth does get lower. There's no proposal from COSATU in dealing with that, which is what this bill tries to primarily resolve. It doesn't deal with Ricardian equivalence, which says in the absence of fiscal rules, generally, states rely on the taxpayers of future taxes to repay debt, and fiscal rules actually prevent the overuse of deficit financing, imposing many, many burdens onto future taxpayers, particularly low-income workers, as states get closer to fiscal cliffs when they're in these situations. It doesn't consider, even I would presume that COSATU has a Keynesian approach to economics. I would certainly expect them to. And in Keynesian economics, it is incorporated generally that there are fiscal rules to regulate the counter-cyclical approach to fiscal policy so that you can both manage economic downturns very well while also not taking on excessive amounts of debts. So there's lots of matters that needed to be engaged with that I've expected COSATU to get into, particularly on the economics of what's being proposed here that they failed to get into. And then ultimately, Chair, the commentary around why doesn't the DA go to workers in Mitchell's Plain and Goodwood and say this? Because that's not what the bill is intended to do. It is quite clear that the bill is to try to force the state to get its fiscal house in order so that we can begin to grow the economy, restore credibility to our budgeting, and get the economy growing again. And this will not have the impact that is being proposed here on workers. Obviously, the state would have to look at its top income earners, its managerial class, and its very top class of workers to make sure that we begin to cut the salaries at millionaire managers at the top over time, because this is leading to the fiscal unsustainability. And it's interesting that when wage agreements are always negotiated and the working class are used as shields to make sure that the managerial class in the state and the catered employees and so on get well above inflation increases while workers continue to get low salaries, that COSATU has nothing to say about it. So I think this entire presentation was regrettably disingenuous. And yes, They accuse the DA of electioneering with this, but I suspect, and based on the commentary and the style and the hyperbolic language, that what we had here was also an electioneering presentation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Sarven. Comrade Matthew, can you please respond?
No, thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, thanks to our members. Chair, I think we want to appreciate the Honorable Comrade Mani's comments, and I think today we're on the same page. And no, Chair, look, I mean, all of our submissions to Parliament, whether it's executive or private members, but we always take it from the stance of what's the impact upon workers, whether it's in a specific sector or whether it's in the economy at large. What's the impact upon working class communities as well, where workers naturally come from? And yes, Chair, I think we have the common alignment. We don't only, in this bill, we look at the issue, what is the impact upon the salaries of nurses or teachers, cleaners? What's the impact upon the quality public services that working class communities depend upon, whether it's the issue of managing or reducing queues at home affairs or at hospitals, reducing the headcount decrease in the police service, etc. And of course, we're very keen to fix the state, to grow the economy, because again, it's workers who are hit the hardest. Middle class, upper class communities can simply opt out of public services in essence. And Chair, look, we're not, economic vandals. We recognize the dangers of the debt getting out of control. We've always looked at the issue that experience other African countries, and how debt has gotten out of control, and it poses a huge risk. So we've been raising for the past maybe 8 years at Parliament the need to manage the debt, but let's manage it in a sustainable, not on a reckless, not a populist path. And again, Chair, when one looks at the public service wage bill, don't take COSATU stats at it. Simply take Treasury stats. It's been stable at 35, and more recently it's decreased to 31%. So it's not the cause of the fiscal crisis. So we're finding the wrong medication and the wrong diagnosis. But Chair, no, I think also to show Honorable Mani, we do take the same approach to executive bills as well. Where government does well, we commend them, cheer them on, ask them to continue to do that. But where government also blunders, we also share our adjectives with them as well, even if it irritates our comrades in the ANC. But I think we always try to take a balanced approach. And even with the private members' bills, when the Honorable David Mania drafted the PIC amendment bill, we supported it, helped sell it to the ANC. When the Honorable Sherilyn Dudley from the ACDP drafted a paternity leave bill, we supported it and engaged the ANC comments, because we think that on many issues, we may have differences because of our color of our T-shirts or logos, but on whether there's issue we agree with each other, whether you're EFF or DA, it doesn't matter. We also look at the national interest, which we know members would also do as well, cross-party line. I think to Honorable Skosana, Chair, look, again, we recognize the fiscal crisis. We're very wary of things getting out of control. And that's why we've always tried to look, what are the practical solutions, whether it's ESCOM giving them the debt relief package, whether it's the issue of Transnet collaborating around security to secure freight rail lines, etc. But we need to have a sustainable approach. We think there is space on the public service wage bill to make some savings, which we've been raising with Parliament for some time. Could we have, for example, a single collective bargaining process for the entire state? Because that might also help to save some money for the fiscus, but also help to ensure the money that we do have goes to the lowest paid workers in the public sector, the cleaners, the nurses, the security guards, etc. We could have discussions around which critical vacancies must be filled. For example, at home affairs, at SARS, in our schools and our police stations. We can, for example, forego some of your management and policy positions in the upper echelons of the state, for example. We don't need to have such large ministries or so many ministries. So there is space to have a rational discussion about where to save. And again, we've raised to the Chair that the principle that we shouldn't have this proliferation of agencies in the state, because those fall outside of the public service collective bargaining processes where there's a cap of what high income earners could earn. In your entities, your SOEs, your agency, there's no cap of what top earners earn. So I think our point here is that there is space to assist the state in a rational debate. But I think, Chair, also that we often like to demonize public service as some sort of, Achilles heel for the state, some sort of burden. But if you look at the South African Revenue Service, Chair, in the past, 2-3 years, there's been positive investments in SARS. An additional 490 staff were employed. They've invested in the IT capacity. appointed competent management, made sure it stayed out of factional or party politics. We've seen a positive turnaround in SARS, increasing revenue for collection, improved tax compliance. So I think, Chair, why we're mentioning SARS, that it's an example that if we invest in the public services the society needs, it has a beneficial impact upon not just workers, working class communities, but even business and society at large, the fiscus too. But again, Chair, I think to underline the point, there is no wage bill crisis. Can't be if it's declined from 35 to 31%. Chair, on the question about Honorable Skosana, the NEDLAC Act requires two types of legislation to go to NEDLAC before being processed by portfolio or select committees. Because obviously once it's in Parliament, Parliament then takes preeminence over any other prior consultations. So ideally the bill should go to NEDLAC before, and the bills that need to go to NEDLAC according to the Act is one, it's bills which deal with labour market issues, so that's effective labour relations, conditions of service, etc., or socio-economic ones. So for example, like national health insurance and so forth. We do appreciate, Chair, there'll be no malice intended by the honourable member drafting it. It's an evolving landscape, private members' bills, not that many been passed, but it is an evolving one. So I think our point is that before committees process them, they should have some engagement at NEDLAC, and we have helped facilitate that previously. The example, Honourable Sherilyn Dudley from the ACDP, when she drafted the parental and adoption leave bill in about 2017, we actually invited her to come to NEDLAC, had an engagement there, and just to kind of make sure we're in compliance with our laws. You don't want to find unattendedly that we actually violated them, etc. But we do appreciate it's an evolving landscape, but nonetheless, it's an important issue. And it helps to enrich. It helps that when Labour and business are able to sit in NEDLAC with government, have in-depth discussions, resolve issues. When it comes to Parliament, many issues have been resolved, and it makes also the task of members of Parliament also easier, that a huge chunk of issues have been resolved. There's kind of a collective ownership, etc. Chair, I think just to Honourable Saropen, well, yes, no, workers would be hysterical when a party says, let's cut the wage bill, let's cut the salaries, or let's retrench workers en masse. Under this, the current scenario of a debt level of over 60% for the foreseeable future, every year public servants, one takes into account inflation, averaging about 4 or 5%. Under the bill's premises of a 5% cut, every year workers in the public service will get a 10% salary cut, at least until 2030. So I'm not sure which worker would not be offended, will not be hysterical in that instance. I'm sure members of Parliament would not be thrilled to see such salary cuts. We're not saying let's not have a debate, but the bill doesn't provide any parameters for a debate. It has three elements. Cut the wage bill by 5% if it's over 60% debt. Have a wage freeze if it's over 55%. And if it's below 55%, link it to GDP growth. Let's ignore inflation. That's the essence of the bill. There's nothing else to it. So there's nothing wrong with having a debate. And that's why we've said, Chair, proposed, let's have a debate on the right level of debt. What should be done? What should we prioritize in the state? What should we shift? What are the things we can't touch? What can we touch? Let's have a debate. That could be a very useful thing. But let's also look at the real cause of the fiscal crisis, because a declining wage bill can't be a cause of a fiscal crisis. The fiscal crisis is because Honourable Manyi is saying we're not growing the economy. If businesses don't sell the products, if workers don't get paid, or we don't create jobs, then of course the state will be in a crisis. And we saw it very clearly in the MTBS last year when there was a 55 billion rand decrease in revenue. And that was simply because of the challenge that transit and the impact they're having in the mining, the manufacturing, the agricultural sector. So let's deal with the right causes. But I think giving Panado to a patient with cancer, that's not going to assist, or skipping breakfast and lunch, Honourable Manyi says, that's not going to assist. That's kicking the can down the road. And the consequence will be, like we're seeing, an increase in the brain drain of skilled public servants like doctors and nurses, teachers, etc. We now have a scenario where Australia is advertising on SABC radio for South African police officers to go to Australia because they have to get paid better, etc. So we need to get the right solution. Chair, also, I think let's also not be ahistorical. This is the same bill the DA tabled roughly in 2021. It was then called the Fiscal Responsibility Bill. Same problematic clauses. It was rejected that time as well. And the bill only speaks to the wage bill, doesn't speak to expenditure. So I'm not sure what fiscal rules would you have which only speaks to the salaries of nurses. And let's look at the other international examples. Let's look at the most important one, which is the United States. They have a fiscal rule. As a consequence, the US congressional budgetary processes are a circus. Every year you have a scenario in the US where they have the state shuts down because Democrats and Congressmen, Republicans can't find each other. They can't pass a budget. And as a consequence, you have skilled public servants in the US going without a salary for a month at a time. I'm not sure if we want to import that level of chaos into South Africa. We've got enough issues. But, then again, the DA wants to get the US to come and help run South African elections. And the US, again, is a country which has real problems in managing elections. Chair, I think for us, we agree with the DA. We need to have a holistic debate on the debt level. There's no disagreement there, but let's find the right approach. But I think rushing a fatally flawed bill 5 minutes before midnight in the 6th Parliament would do an injustice. It would not assist any issues at all. And again, the only useful clause in the bill actually is one which says here's an exemption provision for the Minister of Finance. That's a useful one. You can have a fiscal rule debate, but it needs to be much more comprehensive. It needs to look at the entire expenditure of the state. It needs to look at what are the causes of the fiscal pressures, etc. But it needs to have thorough discussion. But a 5 minutes to midnight discussion won't do justice, especially if its only provision is to basically to bleed nurses and teachers of the salaries. So, Chair, we really hope as we have the last 2.5 months of this elections left, in wrapping up, Chair, that the DA will put this in a pamphlet and it will go to Bonneville and to Bishop Lavis and to tell these teachers and nurses under DA administration, we will cut your salary by 10% every year until 2030. Then I think that's when you will see hysterical responses, Chair. I think I've been very measured and mild on that issue. And again, Chair, the bill is silent on top earners. So it's fine to say the state must find the money. It's fine to say that, but it's not in the bill. The bill doesn't say that. It says nothing. It just says OSDs, and there's issues around the OSDs. And again, Chair, I think it'd be useful for consistency because in the companies bill, we speak for the private sector, was in the Portfolio Committee on Trade, Industry and Competition. And I said, let's allow the private sector companies and SOEs to disclose the wage gap between the top earners and lowest earners as a beginning of changing our corporate culture in South Africa to reducing the apartheid wage gap. The honourable DA members voted against it. So actually, I think here all one can premise, maybe we are hysterical, that we're guilty as charged, no problem. But the DA is quick when it comes to throwing workers under the bus, but it's very short when it comes to throwing the CEOs under the bus. But leave aside my hysterical electrical rhetoric, Chair. But I think for us on a serious note, substantially the bill doesn't assist us. And in fact, if it was implemented, it would be a disaster for workers. It would be a disaster for public services, Chair. Thanks very much, Chair. Apologies for taking so long.
Okay, you're welcome. Dr. George, can you respond to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you and good morning to my colleagues. Thank you very much for taking the time, the effort to read through the documentation and also the time to make a presentation. I am grateful for that because, I mean, obviously, I think the one thing that we all do agree on, and Cosatu said the same thing, is that we do have an economic situation in our country that is very difficult and untenable for South Africans, in particular, working South Africans battling to put enough food on the table, where we have a situation where 81% of households now are skipping at least one meal a day because they simply can't afford to buy enough food. Also, the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund has reported that 5 million of our children in South Africa are starving. And I'm absolutely certain that all of us agree that that is something that is completely unacceptable in a country as rich as ours, and that we do need to find solutions, especially for the most vulnerable South Africans who are bearing the brunt of this really difficult economic times. We have already, as the DA said, that in our alternative budget, that we have an entire range of solutions to rescue our country's economy in the future. But I won't go into the detail of that because time is, of course, limited, and we are debating later on in the House also on the fiscal framework. But there are a couple of things that I think need to be just attended to. Firstly, in terms of the issue about NEDLAC, to be honest, I'm stunned that COSATU are saying that the bill did not go to NEDLAC. It did actually go to NEDLAC. We sent the bill to NEDLAC first because that is in fact what we did previously on other private members' bills. So it did in fact go to NEDLAC, and we did in fact reply from the government or National Treasury. National Treasury did reply, and they said, I mean, we can make available their reply, but National Treasury said that they agreed with some of the points we had made, and then they did not agree with some other points that were made. And Treasury's input was actually very, we thought, quite sensible, because it is correct in saying that Honorable Hill Lewis, before he became the mayor of Cape Town, he was in fact in Parliament, as we know, and he had a bill, I think it was called the Fiscal Responsibility Bill. This bill that we have now is in fact different, similar vein in terms of what we're trying to achieve. Is what we're trying to make sure is that government does not spend so much money in the wrong places that it crowds out service delivery on what government should be doing. So crowding out education and healthcare, social support, etc. You know what government needs to be doing. So that was that vein. So yes, it absolutely did go to NEDLAC, and Treasury replied. We also got a reply from social partners, some social partners, in terms of their perspectives on it as well. I've got the records here as well. That was around March 2023. It's quite been a long time, actually, since we've started processing this. But anyway, I've got the records. But then the response from NEDLAC was that Labour had not replied and had not given any inputs. In fact, what we did was we gave an extension because NEDLAC said, look, okay, they need a bit more time. And then we gave an extension and said, okay, that's fine. Take some more time. And that's where we are. So, I mean, I don't know what's going on over there, but maybe that's a conversation that needs to be had somewhere else. Certainly, that was my reply. So I am stunned that COSATU is saying that they did not go to NEDLAC, and other people are saying the same, because it did. And it was COSATU or Labour, because there's obviously other participants as well in the Labour, in that chamber, that there was no reply. So let's just make it clear that that's what happened. Because, of course, we value the inputs of our colleagues in the Labour movement. Then in terms of it being a pro or not being a pro-worker bill, I mean, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding from COSATU on the bill, is that absolutely not. We are not saying, and if you read the bill clearly, we are not saying cut the wages of the, if you want to call people that, the workers on the front line of service delivery. So, for example, your people who work as our police personnel, if you see people on the front line in our departments, at the counters, etc., it was mentioned cleaners, etc., and a particular category of worker, public workers who are on the forefront of service delivery. We've said it over and over again, ad nauseum, frankly, in our alternative budget and our medium-term budget policy statement, is that is not where you want to go and cut. In fact, those people are the people who are delivering the basic services, the teachers, for example, the nurses, the doctors. That is where the service delivery is being delivered to our people. So we do not want to go there and cut anything over there. What you do want to do, however, and that's the nub of our argument, is you want to go into those people who have been deployed into particular positions in the senior echelons of government, who are earning significantly large salaries, the millionaire manager group, who are not adding the value. That's the point. So if, for example, you thin out that group of people, I mean, obviously you can't just suddenly make a change. I mean, that's clearly not how our constitution and our labor laws work, and we respect that, obviously. But there is natural attrition. People retire, people leave, a whole lot of stuff happens. So there's a lot of ways to manage this whole thing, but absolutely not. There is no intention of cutting the salary of the people that are battling, as we know. It is the DA who said we need to expand the zero VAT rated basket of foodstuff because people are battling to put enough food on the table. It is the DA that says we must cut the tax on fuel because people are battling to get to work and have less disposable income as they pay more for transport and for food. And it is us who have said that we need to increase the child grant to the poverty line because it's hopelessly too low. So we've said we need to do these things, but of course it needs to be managed within the fiscal envelope. And that's how you do it. So you stop government from spending or borrowing. Well, that's the issue. Borrowing so much beyond its capability to pay it back because we're paying R1 billion per day now on a debt interest on debt. So I think we must see this bill in that frame. So it is not true that this bill is anti-worker. This is a pro-worker bill. And I think anybody battling to put enough food on the table would think, well, okay, if we have government borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and to the point where they can't pay me anymore, that's not in anybody's interests. So I think we just need to make clear on that. And then as I mentioned on the NEDLAC, well, as I said, I'm stunned that, there was no reply, but there certainly were 2 opportunities to do that. Then I just want to quickly go through a couple of notes I made, and then I know we're pressed for time. What I want to say specifically about COSATU's presentation is that COSATU does not oppose the spirit and the intention of the bill, which is to stabilize public debt. I mean, we welcome this. Everyone accepts that the current debt trajectory is unsustainable because we've spoken about this many times in this committee. Since the bill was initially introduced, the situation has deteriorated markedly. So our GDP has grown even slower than we anticipated. So it's now 0.1% in the last quarter. I mean, and 0.2 for the whole year, but we need 0.6 for the budget. So we're not going to get enough revenue. So we would be willing to adjust those ratios, the target ratios. We'd be willing to adjust those because our economy is deteriorating even faster than we anticipated it would be. So that we welcome that criticism, and we do want to engage in meaningful debate. And the penultimate goal of this bill is to protect the most vulnerable in our society, like I said, which would be most adversely affected by escalating debt levels. It's never been the DA's intention to cut the salaries of nurses and police officers. And in fact, we've said they're underpaid. So let's not put words into the DA's mouth that aren't there, because that is actually not correct. The DA has made a commitment to protect CPI-linked increases to the frontline workers, as was we've previously said. That's nurses, the teachers, and social workers and police officers. And we will focus on cutting the non-value-added bloat, as I said before, which are not the specialist workers and not covered by the occupational specific dispensation. I know there's been some discussion about that, but the DA certainly does support the fact that there are different categories of people in the public sector. I mean, nobody's disagreeing with that at all. And the only reason why we have brought this bill, and we're talking about having to make some cuts, even in the millionaire manager cadre group, is that the ANC allowed the debt to get out of control. I mean, we can do the maths. I mean, that's the one thing about mathematics. I mean, you can spin whatever you want to, but the numbers are the numbers, whether we like them or not. We don't like them, but, if we could grow the economy faster, of course we will, but that's what we have. So we must work with what we have. Nowhere in the bill does it allow for a blanket freeze. Nowhere. And there's no or cut approach that does not even exist, which would be fiscally irresponsible and would harm frontline staff. And it would be a much blunter instrument. So we didn't propose that. And as I said, it's targeted. So what we want to do is to have less consumption spending, and we want to have capital expenditure, and we want infrastructure spending, because we know what happens when we don't have proper railways and ports and electricity. So we're all on the same page on that. even though the National Treasury announced it will introduce a fiscal anchor, which it has said, nothing has been implemented so far, and we haven't seen anything in the committee either. So, I mean, Treasury is, I'm sure, not going to comment here, but that's a conversation I want to take up with Treasury, because they did respond to my bill in NEDLAC, but you know, they say there's an anchor, but we want to be clearer about it, because they do need to hold the line, and it's not working so well. But anyway, we do trust our Treasury. So we must just be clear about what we're actually trying to talk about here. What we believe is voting against the rules, and as I said, we're willing to adjust the ratios. We think it's not in the best interest of South Africans for us to actually ignore this. It's a problem that needs to be addressed, and we can. The current expenditure rule is not enough, and I think Treasury knows that as well. So yes, I agree. This was also mentioned by Mr. Parks, is that corruption is a massive contributor to public debt, and there is no line item in the budget for that. We know this, but we do need to control and manage it. I think we're all on the same page on that. COSATU intends or tries to redefine this debate around public sector wages. We understand why you would want to do that, but if COSATU truly represents the best interests of the workers, then getting the public debt under control should be a priority, because if you haven't got money, how do you pay for it? We spend 1 billion rand a day on service delivery costs, and that's by far the largest budget item. It's not salaries that are the highest budget item. It's not. It is interest on debt. And you know, any household in South Africa will know, if you get too much debt and you do not increase your income, you are going to have a problem, and you're going to have to cut back on something, and it's going to be painful. So we do not want to cut back on the wages of the people delivering the services at the front line, because that's all we have. Okay, so I've covered that point. I won't belabor it. But as I said before, again, if we do not manage our own debt, other people will manage it for us. Because again, if we do the maths, the economy is not growing. COSATU even said that again, I've made some notes here. So COSATU does not seem to be confident that government can grow the economy. I don't think anybody is. And so if the economy is not going to grow, and we're going to carry on with the debt we have, we might very well get ourselves into a situation where we can't pay it back. And then the people to whom we borrowed this money are going to come along and say, well, actually, we're not going to give you any more, or we're going to make conditions that we're not going to like. So it's better, rather than having your debt collector knocking at your door and coming into your house and saying, oh, well, I'm going to take your lounge suite and your TV. No, rather manage it before it gets to that point. And I mean, any household in South Africa who battles knows that is the situation. So anyway, there we go. And then it is therefore in the best interests for every COSATU member to actually bring debt under control now. I've covered the issues about NEDLAC. I won't go through that again. Again, also, as I said, that the DA has a policy. We've got an economic policy, and we have made very clear what our position is. In fact, we have updated our policy, and we will be rolling out a couple of items in the very near future, because we're thinking about post-29 May. Then just in conclusion, a couple of additional thoughts here about fiscal responsibility and long-term sustainability. As I said before, this bill promotes fiscal discipline and long-term economic stability, which benefits all citizens, most notably the public workers and vulnerable South Africans who depend on service delivery, as I have explained in terms of the system as it works. It is not intended to undermine public servants, but to ensure the sustainability of their employment and the service they provide. So, I mean, I don't have to keep on going on about that. I think it's pretty easy that we can figure that out. And then, of course, in collective bargaining rights, I mean, we've all agreed we have a great constitution. We have labor laws that we do not want to break. I think that perhaps in the cadre deployment scenario, labor laws have been broken, but we do not believe that it's necessary to do that, and that we have very firm labor laws that need amendment. But the fact is they are there. So it is not possible to just suddenly deprive somebody who is working in the public sector of employment. That is not possible. And it's not anybody's intention to do that either, because that is not how we would want to operate, and it's not how our country operates. And we respect our constitution. It does not eliminate collective bargaining, but it seeks to balance immediate demands with future fiscal health. And then finally, again, this is something that COSATU raised and points out corruption, is that what is the root cause of this fiscal crisis that we are facing? And why is it necessary then that we have to actually go to all the effort of wanting to impose fiscal rules? It's because we have a problem in our economy. Our economy is not growing. It is not growing because we don't have conducive economic policies. We have a growth problem. We all agree that. But we also have a spending problem. Now, not everybody agrees that, but I think there was some agreement in COSATU's presentation in terms of spending. We spend a massive fortune on state-owned enterprises, but they're not generating any growth and they're not generating any jobs. In fact, they're draining the economy of jobs because they're not providing the electricity and the ports and the infrastructure that they should. So, I mean, that is the root cause of this situation that we are facing. But I do want to stress also, and I've said it over and over again, and I'll continue to do it, South Africa is a rich country. We have got enormous opportunities and capabilities. We have a young population. We have an entrepreneurial population. We have so much potential. We need to tap it. And that's the massive big tragedy here. It's the opportunity cost of government driving out service delivery and misspending. It's those people that are battling to find employment and get and enjoy the lives that they would want to have. So it is possible in this great country of ours that every single person would be able to become everything that they are capable of becoming within a supportive and enabling environment that a government, effective government, would provide for them. That is what we want for every South African. And that is something I'm sure we all agree upon. We do not agree on how to actually get there. But what we do agree also, to harness that, because that would be letting everybody down, and then we would not be doing our job. And that is why I brought this private members bill, because I care very much about that. I care about every single child in this country that goes to bed hungry at night and doesn't know where the next meal is going to come from. And I care about every single household battling to pay the debts and just to have the life that they're entitled to have. That is why we need to animate ourselves with it. But I do want to thank my colleagues for the time and the effort in giving the inputs. I've made comprehensive notes. I am likely to return after the end of the term in the new one. And who knows, if I'm back on finance, well, I will carry on going because I will never, ever give up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. George, for your response. We have come to the end of our program today. When is the Treasury going to respond, Tebogo? Anytime soon? Or because the private members bill, Treasury does not have to respond. What's the process from here?
Yes, they don't have to respond, sir.
No, okay. Okay. I see a hand, Charmaine van der Merwe.
Yeah, I'm from Legal Services, Charmaine van der Merwe. I just want to confirm that the department does have to respond. I was in fact just busy with an email alerting the committee secretary to Assembly Rule 286 that requires that the department be given an opportunity to respond. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Let's take it from there, that we'll allocate a day when Treasury is going to respond. respond. Thanks for that clarity. Comrade Matthews shared, why are you not interested on the background with Mandela there who inspires him, your original home? Thanks very much, honorable members. Yes, I adjourn the meeting so that we can prepare for this afternoon's debate on the fiscal framework. Thanks.
Don't leave the chair.
Long live the chair.
Thank you. Long live the chair. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Recording stopped.